I noticed the side gate first. Open 4 inches. Not swinging just slightly ajar the way it looks when someone doesn't bother to latch it behind them. I always latch that gate. Every time, 4 years. Inside, the screen door was out of its frame. The house smelled of other people. I went straight to the back room. The safe was open. Not broken, not pried. Opened. All 4 firearms gone. My Glock 17. The .357 I'd carried on plainclothes rotations for 12 years. The 2 rifles. Gone. The interior light was still on, illuminating absolutely nothing. I walked to the kitchen counter. Orange piece of paper. Property inspection conducted. Firearms removed for community safety compliance per Section 14B of HOA community standards. Contact HOA office within 72 hours to schedule compliance review and discuss return. I read it twice, set it down, walked to the front door. She was still there, and she was already talking before I cleared the porch steps. "Oh good, you're home." Clipboard pressed to her chest, lanyard swinging. "We had to secure those weapons. Your storage configuration was non-compliant with our community safety standards. You'll need to schedule a compliance review before we can discuss return." No hesitation. No acknowledgement that she had entered my house while I was gone and walked out with 4 of my firearms. Just procedure delivered like a form letter. I looked at her. 20 years on the job. I'd arrested people for less than what this woman just described to me. Much less. "Which HOA?" I asked. She named it. Clearview Community Association. "Can you show me the document authorizing you to enter my property?" She didn't pause for a second. "You signed the community agreement when you moved in. It's all in your welcome packet." I had never signed anything with these people. Never received a welcome packet. Never paid a Clearview fee, sat in a Clearview meeting, or received a piece of Clearview mail with my name on it. My property wasn't in their HOA. It had never been. But she was standing on my driveway in full daylight, telling me I had agreed to all of this with the specific confidence of someone who had never once been wrong in front of anyone who mattered. The man beside her, Gary, I'd learn later, co-board member, stood with his arms crossed and said nothing. The way men stand when they've done this before, and know their role is to witness, not speak. "If you haven't submitted your compliance request within 72 hours, she continued, your firearms will be transferred to a licensed third-party storage facility at your expense." I want to be precise about what she just said to me. My legally registered property firearms I had owned for over a decade, stored legally documented, completely, would be permanently handed to a third party I had never authorized. Not returned after review, transferred, on a deadline she invented, under a rule she wrote herself, enforced by an HOA that had no legal connection to my address, and she said it like she was doing me a courtesy. I kept my voice completely level. "I'll be in touch." She wrote something on her clipboard, nodded once, and walked back down the street with Gary like they'd just finished a routine errand. The kind of exit you make when you're used to winning by default. I stood in my driveway and watched them go. 20 years in law enforcement teaches you to stay very still when your mind is moving fast. I wasn't loud, angry. What settled in was quieter than that, the specific focus that comes when you recognize exactly what category of crime you're looking at. What she had described wasn't enforcement of any legitimate rule. It was criminal trespass, and the removal of 4 registered firearms from a property she had no legal connection to was felony theft. 4 counts. She had explained it to me like she was doing me a favor. She spoke with the certainty of someone who had never once been checked. She had no idea she had just committed a felony against someone who spent 20 years classifying exactly this kind of crime. I went back inside, picked up the orange notice from the counter, read it one more time. Section 14B, Clearview Community Association, 72 hours. I set it back down exactly where I found it, face up, untouched. Then I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a notepad, and started writing. Time of arrival, position of the gate, condition of the safe, her exact words, Gary's presence, the HOA's name, the specific phrase she used. You signed the community agreement when you moved in. Every detail. In order. A habit built over 20 years that I hadn't needed since I retired. I was going to need it now. What Karen hadn't bothered to check, what none of them had, was whether my property was actually inside their HOA, and what the man standing in front of her used to do for a living. Let me tell you about the neighborhood I lived next to for 4 years. Not in, next to. That distinction is going to matter more than anything else in this story. The Clearview Community Association covered 96 homes on the east side of a tree line that ran along the back of my property. A developer had platted the subdivision in 2003, incorporated the HOA the same year, and recorded the founding documents with the county, a specific list of 96 lot numbers, each one legally bound to the CC and RS and community standards that came with the Clearview name. My lot was not in that list. I had purchased my property in the spring of 2019, a single parcel on the west side of that tree line, separate deed, separate recording date, no easements, no CC and Rs, no legal connection to Clearview's founding documents. My lot had been recorded with the county before the HOA was incorporated. I was a completely independent property owner who happened to share a fence line with their subdivision. I knew this. I had read every document in the transaction, twice, had them verified and filed the copies. I just assumed the HOA had done the same. That assumption turned out to be generous. Deborah Marsh had been Clearview board president for 6 years by the time she walked up my driveway. Before that, 22 years in HR management, the last 8 as a department head. She had the specific personality that environment produces when left unchecked. Someone who had discovered that most people would rather absorb a bad outcome quietly than start a fight they might lose. She ran the HOA the same way, logged infractions, issued fines fast, processed appeals slowly, and never in the direction the appellant hoped. The neighbors called her Karen. Not to her face. She walked the subdivision on weekend mornings with a clipboard. She photographed front yards from the street without knocking. She had designed a standardized infraction form, 3 copies, and she used them constantly. A retired teacher named Margaret received a $900 fine for using the wrong mulch color. The Clearview standard specified natural brown. Margaret had used reddish brown. She paid within the week because she was 71 and her house was paid off, and she wasn't going to risk that over mulch. The Reyes family received $400 fines for 3 consecutive months because their adult son parked his truck in their driveway on weekends. Visible trucks were a residential aesthetic violation. They asked their son to visit less. Karen sent a letter congratulating them on their improved compliance. A contractor named Phil had power tools removed from his storage shed the previous year. Secured pending compliance audit, Karen called it. The audit was never scheduled. The tools were never returned. Phil kept telling himself he'd deal with it. That was exactly what Karen was counting on. 2 families had tried disputing fines through the HOA's internal review process. Both were buried in procedural delays until the cost of continuing outweighed whatever they stood to recover. Karen had never lost a filed complaint, not once in 6 years. Not because she was right, but because right had very little to do with whether you won against her. What mattered was whether you could outlast her filing cabinet. Most people couldn't. So they paid and went quiet. 3 months before she came to my property, Karen pushed a new resolution through the board. She drafted it herself, the Community Safety and Hazardous Materials Standards Policy. 2 pages, typed at home, signed by Karen, seconded by Gary, ratified by a 3-person quorum at a meeting where it appeared on the agenda simply as Safety Update. No homeowner vote, no attorney review, no filing with any government office. Hazardous materials was defined broadly. Community safety compliance actions gave the board authority to take necessary steps to secure or remove items that pose a risk to the Clearview community. Karen had written herself permission to take things. Over 4 years, I had received 7 HOA notices at my door. 3 were general memos sent to the perimeter by mistake. 4 were directed at my property. Each time I had sent a brief written response. This property is not subject to Clearview's jurisdiction per county records. Please see enclosed parcel documentation. I kept copies of everything sent and received. The notices stopped coming 18 months in. I assumed someone had finally checked. They hadn't. They had simply moved on to easier targets and came back to me when they felt ready. What I found out later was that not one of those 7 notices had ever included a document showing my address within their jurisdiction. Not one. When I pushed back in writing, they stopped. Not because they verified my claim, but because they were used to people who didn't push back at all. My documentation habit had been running quietly for 4 years. Every letter returned, every copy filed, every date recorded, done out of professional reflex, not expectation. In 20 years of law enforcement, you write things down before you know whether they matter. The cases that fall apart are the ones where someone assumed the details would be obvious later. Nothing is obvious later. Only what you wrote down. That stack of paper was about to become the beginning of something. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, which was the front room of Karen's house, with a laminated sign on the door. I pressed record on my phone before I got out of the car. In my state, one-party consent. That meant I was the only person in the conversation who needed to know it was being recorded. Karen didn't need to know. She wasn't going to know. I rang the bell. She answered in under 30 seconds, which told me she had been expecting someone. Gary was already inside, standing against the wall with a coffee mug. A third person stood near the window, a younger man, Karen introduced as the HOA's security consultant. His credentials I immediately doubted. He had the posture of someone who uses his size to fill rooms, and hadn't yet encountered a room where that didn't work. "I'm here to collect my property," I said. Karen set her clipboard on the desk. "Your address is in compliance hold. You'll need to submit a formal request to attend a compliance review, and then we can discuss the return process. I'd like them returned today, in writing if possible." That's not how the process works. I kept my voice completely level. "Under what legal authority did you enter my property yesterday?" She reached behind her and produced a document. 2 pages, printed on standard copy paper. No county header, no attorney letterhead, no filing stamp. The Community Safety Resolution. She placed it on the desk between us like it was a court exhibit she had been waiting to produce. I read it in full, both pages. Let the silence sit while I did. When I finished, I looked up. Was this reviewed by a licensed attorney? We handle our own community governance. Was it filed with the county? We don't need county approval to enforce our own community standards. I asked for a copy. She opened a drawer and produced one pre-made, ready to hand out, which meant she had prepared for exactly this kind of meeting. She slid it across the desk with the quiet satisfaction of someone playing what they believe is their strongest card. She would regret that later. I folded the copy once and placed it in my jacket pocket, directly over the phone that was still recording. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "Can you show me where my property address appears in your recorded jurisdiction?" Karen turned to the credenza behind her and came back with a map. Color-printed home computer by the look of it. No survey notation, no scale bar, no recording date, no official stamp of any kind. She spread it on the desk and gestured broadly at a shaded area covering the subdivision and several properties surrounding it. "This whole area falls under our community oversight." I looked at the map, found my address, pointed to it. "This lot, right here. Is this inside your recorded boundary?" She didn't hesitate for a single moment. "Adjacent properties fall under our safety mandate in community emergency situations." I filed that sentence away, the way you file something when you know exactly which room it belongs in. Adjacent properties fall under our safety mandate. Not, "Yes, your lot is listed in our jurisdiction." Not, "Here is the document placing your address under our authority." Just being next to them was the same as belonging to them. Said without a flicker of doubt, recorded on a phone in my jacket pocket. Adjacency is not jurisdiction. It has never been. But she said it like it was settled law, like I was the unreasonable one for asking. I said nothing. I let it sit in the room. Then she escalated. She told me the HOA would be placing a lien on my property for non-compliance costs. A lien can freeze a sale or refinancing until cleared, legitimate or not, and Karen knew exactly how that pressure worked. She told me their attorney would be contacting me within the week. She repeated the 72-hour deadline. If I hadn't submitted a compliance request by then, my firearms would be transferred to a licensed third-party storage facility, permanently out of her office's hands and into someone else's, indefinitely, at my expense. She said it all with the steady, practiced cadence of someone who had delivered bad news to people who had no choice but to accept it. Unthreatened, unhurried, completely certain she was holding every card. What she had actually done was hand me the resolution, put her adjacency theory on the record, and threatened to permanently transfer my legally registered property without authorization, all on a recording she didn't know existed. "I'll be in touch," I told her. "You should get a lawyer," she said. First useful thing she'd said all morning. I drove home, transferred the recording to my laptop, made 2 backup copies. Then I laid the community safety resolution flat on my kitchen table and read it again, this time looking for every place the language would fall apart under real scrutiny. It didn't take long. What I didn't tell Karen, what I had no reason to tell her yet, was that I'd spent the hour before walking into her office on the phone with the county DA's office. The DA's office said they'd call me back within 48 hours. I spent those 48 hours working. First stop, the county recorder's office. 40 minutes each way, government parking, fluorescent lighting, the particular quiet of a room where public records live. I'd been in rooms like it hundreds of times. There is nothing dramatic about a county records office. It's just shelving and filing systems and clerks who have seen everything and react to none of it. I asked for 2 documents. The first was the official plat map for the Clearview subdivision, the survey filed with the county when the developer created it in 2003. 96 lots, each numbered and precisely drawn to legal standard. My parcel sat on the western edge, separate lot number, separate recording date, its own boundary lines recorded before the HOA was incorporated. No easement running from Clearview onto my deed. No notation connecting my property to their documents. Adjacent, not belonging. The second was Clearview's official incorporation filing, the legal instrument that created the HOA and defined its jurisdiction. It contained a list of the specific lot numbers the association was authorized to govern. 96 lot numbers. I checked mine against the list. Then I checked again. My lot number was not there. The HOA had been legally created to govern 96 properties. Mine was not one of them. It had never been one of them. Every notice Clearview had ever placed on my door, every fine they had threatened, every contact they had initiated over 4 years, all of it issued to a property they had 0 recorded legal authority over. I asked the clerk for certified copies of both documents and paid for them at the counter. This was the case. Everything else I was about to build would support these 2 pages close exits block, counter arguments, establish pattern and intent. But the foundation was already in my hands. I drove back through the subdivision on my way home and stopped at 3 houses. Margaret was 71 and lived 4 doors from the east entrance. When I introduced myself as the neighbor on the other side of the tree line, the one Clearview had taken firearms from, she opened the door all the way and invited me in. She had kept everything. Every notice, every infraction form, every letter filed chronologically in a manila envelope. She retrieved from a kitchen drawer without having to look for it. The $900 mulch fine from 2022 I already knew about. What I didn't know was the follow-up, 6 months later. Karen had placed a $1,200 lien directly against Margaret's property title over a ceramic garden ornament visible from the street. Margaret had paid it in 2 installments. She had been told the lien could trigger foreclosure proceedings if unresolved, and she hadn't been willing to find out whether that was true. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I was gathering information. She handed me the envelope. The Reyes family was home on a Tuesday afternoon. Both parents, their adult daughter, translating when my Spanish ran out. 3 months of $400 parking fines. I knew that part. What I didn't know was that Karen had shown up at their door in person after the 3rd fine and told them continued non-compliance could complicate your situation here. The daughter said the word situation in a way that made clear it hadn't been said neutrally. Their son visited twice in the months after that. Both times he parked 2 streets over and walked. Phil answered in work clothes, sawdust on his forearms. He confirmed what I already knew. Tools removed from his storage shed 8 months ago. Compliance audit, never scheduled. Tools never returned. He had sent 2 follow-up emails to the HOA office. One response. His case was under ongoing review. He showed me the emails. I photographed the screen. What I noticed across all 3 houses was the specific shape of each incident. Entry onto private property, unilateral removal, or financial action. A compliance process invented afterward to justify what had already been done. Then silence, deliberate, sustained, until the person stopped pushing. This wasn't aggressive but legitimate HOA enforcement. It was a confiscation playbook that had been running for years, refined through repetition, applied to people with fewer options. My property was the next iteration of something Karen had been doing successfully for a long time. Just the wrong property, wrong person. She didn't know that yet. That evening, I reviewed my security camera footage. At 11:14 a.m., on the day my firearms were taken, a white HOA-branded utility van pulled into my driveway. Karen and Gary got out. They walked directly to the side gate, not the front door, and let themselves through. They were on my property for 22 minutes. No call to me beforehand, no knock on a neighbor's door, no posted notice at the entry point. They came, entered, took what they came for, and left. 22 minutes on a property they had no legal connection to without my knowledge or consent. I saved the footage in 3 separate locations and added it to the file building on my kitchen table. Plat map, incorporation filing, community safety resolution, recording from Karen's office, camera footage, Margaret's envelope, photos of Phil's emails. Every item in that stack had come from Karen's own actions. She had built this case without knowing she was building it. 2 days after the meeting in Karen's office, I was at my kitchen table when the certified mail arrived. The envelope had a law firm's return address. I opened it at the counter, standing up the way you open things you've been expecting. It was a cease and desist letter. 4 pages formal letterhead signed by an attorney named Brendan Calloway of a firm called Calloway and Marsh Associates. I read the name twice. Marsh. Same last name as Deborah. I noted that without drawing a conclusion, but I noted it. The letter stated that my visit to the HOA office had constituted harassment of board members, and that any further contact with Deborah, Marsh, Gary Kowalski, or any Clearview board member would result in immediate legal action. It cited the community safety resolution as legitimate authority. It described my request to retrieve my firearms as an aggressive demand inconsistent with the HOA's established compliance process. It told me in the formal language attorneys use when they want something to sound final to stand down. I read it all the way through. Then I set it on the table next to the plat map and the incorporation filing and the copy of the resolution Karen had handed me herself. She had tried to use the legal system to silence me. What she didn't know was that Calloway had written 4 pages of aggressive legal language based entirely on her version of events. A version that didn't include the fact that my property wasn't in her HOA, that the entry had been unauthorized, or that every word she'd said to me in that office was on a recording. Every word of that cease and desist was now part of my file. Evidence of coordination, not protection. I photographed the return address, wrote down Calloway's full name and bar number in my notepad. 3 hours later, there was a knock at my door. 2 uniformed officers, professional, composed. One introduced himself as Officer Tran, the other, Officer Delgado. A complaint had been filed against me. Karen had gone to the precinct and reported that I had visited her home. In a threatening and intimidating manner, refused to leave when asked, and created a hostile situation for board members. I stepped back from the door. "Please come in." They came in. They looked at the kitchen table documents, spread across the surface, organized, labeled, dated. "Before you tell me what she said," I told them, "let me show you what I have." I walked them through it in sequence. The orange notice, the empty safe, the camera footage from 11:14 a.m., HOA van in my driveway, Karen and Gary through my side gate, 22 minutes on property, the plat map, my lot number, then the Clearview boundary, the incorporation filing, the column of 96 lot numbers, mine absent, my property deed recording date, no HOA notation, then the community safety resolution Karen had printed at home and handed me as legal authority. Officer Tran picked it up, read both pages, set it down. "Sir," he said, "if this documentation is accurate." "It's certified by the county," I said. "Verifiable at the recorder's office. Open record." He looked at Delgado, then back at me. "This may be a criminal matter." "It is. I'd like to file a formal theft report. 4 firearm serial numbers here." I slid a sheet across the table. Legally registered, documented purchase records attached. removed from my property without authorization by individuals with no legal connection to this address. I reached into the folder and placed my retired law enforcement identification on the table. The room shifted. Tran picked it up, read it carefully, looked up. "What department, sir?" I told him. 20 years. Patrol the first 6 Detective Division after that. Certified firearms instructor for the last 12 years of my service. I named the department. Tran would have recognized my last commanding officer's name if he'd worked the region long enough. He and Delgado exchanged a look that lasted 1 second and said everything. Karen had gone to a police station and described a former law enforcement officer, one who had spent 12 years certifying other people on firearms, as an intimidating aggressor for asking for his legally registered property back. She had sent the police to my door the same way she'd used liens and fines as pressure on someone she assumed had no tools to resist it. She had picked the wrong assumption every single time. "The cease and desist arrived this morning," I said, and placed it on top of the pile. "Same attorney whose last name matches the board president's." Neither officer spoke for a moment. The formal theft report took 40 minutes. 4 firearms, make, model, serial number, camera footage, timestamps, the certified plat map and incorporation filing cited by county record number, the community safety resolution listed as the instrument used to justify the entry, with a note on its absence of any official legal standing. Karen and Gary listed by full name, Callaway and Marsh Associates listed by name and bar number. I kept copies of everything. When we finished, Tran stood, looked at the table one last time, then at me. He asked if I had any law enforcement background he should include in the report. I gave him the same answer I'd given him at the table. He went quiet for a long moment. "Sir," he said, "you need to make that call to the DA before end of day. Today." The meeting notice went out by email to all 96 Clearview homeowners on a Thursday evening. Emergency community meeting. Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock, the Clearview Clubhouse. Agenda: Community Safety Update and Property Compliance Policy Review. I was not a Clearview homeowner. I received the notice anyway, forwarded by Margaret, who had noticed my name wasn't on the distribution list and thought I should know. I decided to attend. The clubhouse held about 80 people if you added folding chairs to the back rows. By 3:05, it was nearly full. 70-plus residents, some I recognized from 4 years of living on the other side of the tree line. Most I didn't. Margaret was in the 3rd row, hands folded in her lap. The Reyes family sat together near the middle. Phil stood against the wall to the left. I took a seat in the back row and didn't introduce myself to anyone. At the front table, Karen sat center, with Gary on her left and a young man in a business suit on her right. He had a leather portfolio and the posture of someone who had been briefed on a situation, but hadn't yet seen the documents the other side was holding. He introduced himself as Price, an associate from Callaway's firm, mid-30s, polished, confident in the way of someone whose confidence hadn't been tested today. Karen called the meeting to order without a microphone. She didn't need one. She had been running this room for 6 years. She opened with the community safety resolution, not as a controversial action, as a civic achievement. Proactive, responsible. A board that takes the safety of its families seriously, doesn't wait for something to go wrong before acting. The inspection of the adjacent property had been conducted under properly ratified policy. The items removed had posed a genuine risk to the community. She used the word secured 4 times in 3 minutes. She did not use the words stolen, trespassed, or criminal. She was polished, practiced. She had the composure of someone who has run the same meeting in their head 100 times and already knows how it ends. Price stood and read from a prepared statement. He cited community standards codes. He cited adjacency emergency provisions as legal basis for the property inspection. He used phrases like, within the scope of the board's enforcement authority, and consistent with established HOA governance standards. Dense enough to sound authoritative if you didn't know what you were listening for. I knew exactly what I was listening for. Several residents visibly settled. A woman 2 rows ahead nodded. A man near the window uncrossed his arms. For about 10 minutes, the room had the atmosphere of a meeting that had already reached its conclusion. Karen presenting her attorney, confirming the community receiving. She had a lawyer, a policy document, and a room full of people who had spent 6 years learning not to push back. For 10 minutes, she looked completely untouchable. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't shift in my seat. I sat in the back row and watched. Then a man near the center stood up. I didn't know him. Late 40s, spoke carefully. He asked the question several people in the room had been thinking but hadn't said out loud. The property you're describing, the one where the inspection took place, that's not actually inside our HOA, is it? That's the lot on the other side of the tree line. The room went a degree quieter. Karen answered without missing a beat. Adjacent properties fall under our community safety mandate in emergency situations. Price leaned forward slightly. The legal basis for this action has been reviewed and is sound. 2 statements, both false. Neither of them knew what was in the folder on my lap. The man sat down. He didn't look fully satisfied, but he didn't press further, which was exactly how it worked in this room. A question raised, an answer delivered with enough confidence to make continuing feel unreasonable, and the meeting moving on. Karen asked if there were further questions. There weren't. She thanked everyone for attending, said the board remained committed to the safety and standards of the Clearview community, closed her portfolio. I wrote 1 line in the small notebook I'd brought, closed it, put it in my jacket pocket. People filtered out through the side doors into the parking area. I moved slowly, letting the room thin. Near the parking lot entrance, Margaret caught up to me. She walked beside me for a few steps without saying anything. Then, quietly, "Are you going to do something about all of this?" I looked at her. Already did. She held my gaze for a moment. Something in her face that had been tight for a long time shifted slightly. She nodded once and turned back toward her car. I kept walking. I had come to this meeting for one specific reason: to watch Karen perform the story she had constructed, and to document who helped her perform it. Price's name, his firm, his statement, delivered publicly to 70 witnesses, citing sound legal basis for an action taken on a property his client had never had jurisdiction over. She had just handed me the room, and everyone in it. She just didn't know whose case she was building. I took a seat in the back row and said nothing, because in 48 hours I wasn't going to need a microphone. I was going to need the DA. 48 hours after the community meeting, 2 county detectives knocked on my door at 9 in the morning. Detective Arroyo was the lead. 50s, deliberate, the kind of calm that comes from having done this work for a long time. His partner, Detective Wills, was younger, mid-40s, notebook already open when I answered the door. Behind them, a woman from the DA's office named Chen, who had called me the previous afternoon to confirm the meeting. I had the kitchen table ready. They spread out across the chairs, and I walked them through the full packet in sequence, the same sequence I had built over the previous 4 days, each item in the order it belonged. I didn't editorialize, I didn't rush. I had done this in interview rooms for 20 years, and the instinct was still there. Lay the material flat, let it speak, don't fill the silence. The plat map first. Official county survey, certified copy, recorded 2003. 96 lots, each numbered, each boundary drawn to legal standard. I pointed to my parcel at the western edge. Separate lot number, separate recording date, its own deed. Then, I opened the incorporation filing beside it. Arroyo leaned forward. I pointed to the column of lot numbers, the 96 properties the Clearview HOA had been legally created to govern. I ran my finger down the list. My lot number was not there. Arroyo looked at the 2 documents for a long moment, then at me. They had no legal connection to your property. None, I said. They never did. That was the whole case in 2 sentences. Everything else existed to make sure it stayed that way. I placed the community safety resolution on the table. Chen picked it up, read it, set it down without comment, which was its own kind of verdict. Then I opened my laptop and played the recording from Karen's office. Her voice clear and confident. Adjacent properties fall under our safety mandate in community emergency situations. Arroyo wrote in his notebook. I played the section twice. The second time, nobody said anything while it ran. I showed them the camera footage, 11:14 a.m., the HOA van in my driveway, Karen and Gary. Through the side gate, 22 minutes, no call beforehand, no notice posted, no contact of any kind. Wills leaned in and watched the gate entry twice. 4 firearms, I said, and placed the registration documents on the table. All legally owned, all documented. Arroyo looked at Chen. She gave a small nod. "Sir," he said, "I need to ask about your background." I told him. 20 years. Patrol Detective Division certified firearms instructor for the last 12 years of my service. Arroyo paused for a moment before writing it down. The pause of someone who understood exactly what it meant that this particular person had built this particular file. Chen asked for certified copies of everything on the table. I had a second set in a manila envelope. I slid it across without being asked. Arroyo stood. "We're going to need to make a stop." I followed in my own vehicle. Karen's door opened before Arroyo had finished knocking. She came out onto the step with the posture of someone who had been preparing for this moment and was ready for it. She had a folder under her arm. She started speaking before anyone else did. "This is a compliance matter, not a police matter. We have legal counsel involved, and any questions should be directed to Dot." Arroyo held up the certified plat map. He didn't say anything. He pointed to the lot number column, then to where my lot number was not. Karen looked at the document. Her mouth stayed open around a sentence she didn't finish. She looked at the column, looked at Arroyo, looked at the column again. The folder slipped slightly under her arm, and she pressed it back with her elbow. "That's not, that map doesn't account for." She stopped, started again. "Adjacent properties are covered under..." "Ma'am," Arroyo said, "is Gary Kowalski here?" Gary appeared behind her in the hallway. He had heard everything from inside. He looked at the plat map in Arroyo's hand, and something in his face went ahead and finished the calculation Karen was still refusing to complete. "I told her," Gary said. His voice came out smaller than I think he intended. "I told her we needed to verify the property line before we did anything, before we went." He looked at Karen, then quickly away. "I said we needed to check." Karen turned to look at him. Whatever she had planned to say to the detectives, she hadn't planned for that. The search warrant covered the property. They found my firearms in Karen's garage, a plastic storage bin on the second shelf, pushed toward the back, each one in a clear zip bag. On the outside of the bin, facing out, was an orange HOA sticker, the same color as the notice she had left on my kitchen counter. I drove back home. Arroyo brought them to my door 20 minutes later. 4 firearms, each tagged with a property receipt. I opened each bag and confirmed every serial number against my registration sheet while Arroyo watched. Then I signed the return receipt dated it kept my copy. I put all 4 back in the safe, closed the door, turned the lock until it clicked. Price arrived at Karen's house as the detectives were finishing. He had his portfolio, his prepared statement, the full weight of Calloway and Marsh's letterhead behind him. Arroyo handed him the plat map and the incorporation filing and gave him 30 seconds with them. Price read it again, looked at the lot number column, looked at Karen. He asked quietly for a moment to speak with his client. Arroyo stepped back and waited. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When Price came back, his portfolio was closed and his prepared statement was inside it, unread. He told Arroyo he would be in touch and walked to his car. Karen and Gary were each served with a criminal summons before the detectives left the driveway. Felony theft, 4 counts. Criminal trespass. Karen received hers and stood holding it without looking at it, staring at the plat map Arroyo had left on her porch railing. Gary went inside without a word. The community group chat had 73 members. By evening, Margaret had posted 3 words. "It's over, everyone." 6 years of paid fines and quiet compliance found a voice all at once. I didn't see the thread until the next morning. Phil had added me to the chat overnight. His message timestamped 11:47 p.m. "Thank you." The call from Chen came 9 days after the detectives left Karen's driveway. The DA's office had reviewed the full file. The criminal summonses had been formalized into charges. Felony theft, 4 counts. Criminal trespass. The case was proceeding. Chen walked me through the timeline. Preliminary hearings, the possibility of a plea, civil exposure on top of the criminal charges. I didn't have many questions. I had spent 20 years watching cases move through exactly this process. I thanked her and hung up. The community meeting to vote on the Clearview board happened 11 days after that. I wasn't invited and didn't ask to be. It was a Clearview matter, and I wasn't a Clearview homeowner. Margaret texted me the result when it was done. Karen had resigned before the vote, submitted her letter to the interim administrator the morning of the meeting, citing personal health considerations. Gary stepped down the same day. The third board member, the one who had seconded the community safety resolution without asking a single question about its legal standing, submitted his resignation by email that evening. The vote was brief. A new interim board of 5 residents was appointed. Their first official act was to formally rescind the Community Safety and Hazardous Materials Standards Policy and confirm that no further enforcement actions would be taken under its authority. Their second was to contact the county attorney's office and request a formal jurisdictional review. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from the county attorney's office. I read it standing at the counter, the same counter where I had found the orange notice a month earlier. The letter confirmed in official language with a case reference number that my parcel had never been within Clearview's recorded jurisdiction, carried no CC&R obligations, and was not subject to any Clearview enforcement authority. It would be filed with the county recorder and a copy sent to the new board. I folded it, made a copy for my records, and added the original to the file. The financial fallout took a few more weeks to work through. Callaway withdrew from the Clearview account without comment the week the charges were filed. An independent audit of the HOA's enforcement history found what anyone paying attention already suspected: years of fines under questionable authority, several liens placed without proper process, and a legal fund largely drained by 6 years of Callaway's billing. Margaret received a formal letter from the new board, reversing her $1,200 lien, with a refund of the original amount plus interest. She called me when it arrived. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The Reyes family's 3 months of parking fines, $1,200 total, were reviewed and refunded. Their son started parking in the driveway again. I saw his truck there on a Saturday afternoon and didn't think much of it, which was exactly as it should be. Phil's power tools were located in the HOA storage unit, boxed and labeled with his name. The new board sent a written apology with the return. He texted me a photo of the toolbox back in his shed. The message underneath read, "All present and accounted for." My own legal costs were covered through a civil agreement with the new board's insurance carrier. What circulated through the neighborhood in those weeks, I heard it in pieces, from Margaret, from Phil, from the Reyes daughter, was less about the legal outcome and more about how I had handled it. Nobody in the subdivision had known what I used to do for a living until it came out through the investigation. Nobody had seen me raise my voice, post anything publicly, or say a single word at the community meeting where I sat in the back row. The detail people seemed to hold on to was simple. I had been calm, built the case correctly, and let the law do the rest. No spectacle, no retaliation, no performance of victory. Margaret told me she had heard one of the new board members describe it at a coffee meeting. "He didn't make it a spectacle," the board member had said. "He just made it right." That was the most accurate thing anyone said about any of it. On a Thursday evening, about a month after the charges were filed, I sat on my porch as the light went down behind the tree line. The boundary between my property and the subdivision had been officially confirmed in writing and filed with the county. No more notices on my door, no more orange paper on the counter, no more calls to return or documents to organize. The case was moving through the system on its own now. My part was done. I thought briefly about 20 years of that work. Patrol cars and interview rooms and the specific weight of carrying a badge in a county where people expected you to know the answer, and mostly you did. I had retired thinking that part of my life was fully behind me. The evidence file, the receipts, the sequence, all of it. Some habits don't retire when you do. Sitting there watching the light change behind the tree line, I found I didn't mind. I went inside as it got dark. On the kitchen counter, in exactly the spot where the orange notice had been sitting when I came home 4 weeks ago, there was a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside it, the original notice: property inspection conducted. Firearms removed for community safety compliance per Section 14B. Contact HOA office within 72 hours. The same document Karen had left as her authority. The DA's case file number was written on a label on the outside. I was holding it until it was needed. Tomorrow, I would drop it off. I set it back on the counter, made a pot of coffee, took my cup to the kitchen table and sat down.
In the safe in the back room, all 4 firearms were exactly where they belonged. The lock I had turned that afternoon, with Arroyo watching, was the same lock I had been turning for years before any of this started. Same sound, same resistance. The same clean click at the end.
Everything in its place. For the first time in 3 weeks, I didn't have a single call to make.